Hello, I'm Magnus Oman, and I want to welcome you to another Life and Times of Leading Cardiologist. We're very fortunate to have an old friend, Deepak Bhatt, who is professor of medicine at Harvard. He's also head of the interventional program at Brigham. And we're going to talk a little bit about your life. But I have to say, you and I got together very early. I want to say in the 90s. We had lunches where we actually got together, and we both of us worked with Eric and Rob, and we learned a lot from that experience. But we actually got together as an entity of a group, having lunches and at the meetings. And so this is almost like one of those lunches again.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back a number of years.
No, it brought back a lot of good memories when we were trying to figure out exactly when and where did we meet. But those were really great meetings. Got to know a lot of folks at Duke and Cleveland Clinic really, really well.
And Rob and Eric trained a lot of good people. I guess both of us trained with them, so we should be happy. But
absolutely.
So tell us a little bit. But where did you actually grow up, Deepak?
Yeah, it's amazing. I really consider you a good friend, and we've known each other, I think, really well and for so long. But you're right. When you were chatting with me before, we've never really talked about those sort of things. So, I was born in India, but when I was really young, my family moved to the U.S., and it was not really meant to move to the U.S. My father was coming over. I think it was on one of those old Ford Foundation grants in the 60s to get his PhD in linguistics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison.
This is why you're such a good writer.
Well,
that's an amazing coincidence. But go on, yes.
Well, in fact, when I was older, he ended up moving to Boston University. But by that stage in life, he actually would get me to do copy editing for him. So I actually did do some editing for him. And I don't know, maybe that did sort of spark my love of writing. It may have had some role in that. But at any rate, so we were there in Wisconsin for a while. And the plan my parents had hatched was to go back to India. But as it turned out, once he got his PhD, at that time, there really weren't a lot of roles for academic linguists with a PhD in India. So he ended up staying in the US. And what we did was sort of follow his academic career around. It's a very small field, especially back then. It's actually blossomed quite a bit now in terms of computational linguistics, natural language processing, AI, and that sort of thing. But when he was doing it, those things hadn't yet started.
And was the linguistics as part of Hindu, or what's the linguistic English? I guess that's the...
Well, linguistics is, it really transcends any specific language. It's the study of language. And really, back then it was, I suppose, more of a liberal arts-based field. It's evolved now, in some cases, to more of a technical field, again, serving oftentimes as the basis for algorithms for natural language processing.
And where in India did the family come from?
Well, we lived all over, even when we were in India, I should say. My parents did, but where I was born was actually, at the time, a really small village. It's grown since then, like a lot of places called Udupi. But you wouldn't have heard of it, though it is famous for its cuisine.
Oh, okay.
In particular, vegetarian cuisine. It's very well known among people that like Indian food. But so we were in Wisconsin for a while, and then the plan changed from going back to India to where would he get his next job? So we traveled following his career around the Midwest. So he was on the faculty at Michigan State and University of Minnesota, St. Paul. I was on the faculty at the College of Worcester in Worcester, Ohio, small liberal arts college, really nice college.
My daughter applied there.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah, so you know of it. Yeah,
yes.
Really lovely town and just a great liberal arts college. But then ended up getting recruited to Boston University, where he spent several years on the faculty. Teaching linguistics and other sorts of things.
And were you a large family, brothers and sisters?
No, well, it's interesting. My actual family is pretty small. It's just my parents, my sister, and me. But the families they came from were kind of large. My mother just had 2 siblings. One had died, unfortunately, at a younger age. But my father had 13 siblings. In fact, one had also died there. So he came from a huge family and a rather small village. I mean, and that's still a village. So, and a rather poor background too, as you might imagine. At that era, especially a village and a large family like that, there wasn't a lot of money. It's a lot of love, but not a lot of money.
And so the Bhatt family was basically half the village, almost, from what you're describing.
It was a big village, actually. There were a lot of people.
So did your mother work during this process?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. She was actually a science teacher in India. I'm not sure she really ever loved linguistics. My parents never pressured me to go into anything, but the one thing my mother would always tell me is, don't go into linguistics. There's no money there, and you need to move around a lot. But other than that, they didn't really care what I did. But she was a science teacher, and she really liked that. She didn't actually get to do that again here. I think just the barrier of entry was too high. Need to get all sorts of new certificates and everything. She stayed at home when we were young. But then later on, she actually worked at what's become Macy's.
Yes.
That's a big, I think it's probably around there in Durham too, but it's a big chain of stores. But where she worked was, before it became part of this conglomerate, was what used to be called Jordan Marsh in downtown Boston. So,
wow. So your formative years were in Boston.
Kind of. I mean, when I was really young, we were moving around the Midwest a lot. Yeah. And I must say, it made moving around not so traumatic. For some people, especially at a young age, moving can be kind of traumatic. I know as a parent, I always think about, is it a good idea to move or not because of the kids? But, I got used to moving around and getting, plopped in a new city and having to make new friends quite a bit. So it never bothered me. And I don't think it's done any psychological damage, but you can be the judge of that.
No. In fact, it explains a lot of your ability to communicate with so many broad array of people. So it's actually wonderful to hear this. So you went to high school in Boston? Is that?
Yeah, so I'm a product of the Boston public school system, a couple of public schools before that, but then went to Boston Latin, the oldest school in the country. And oldest high school in the country, and graduated from there. I was valedictorian, actually. And then,
Did you hold a valedictorian speech?
I did.
Good. And what was it about?
Well, it was mostly just about, young people and making sure they use their talent to do something useful in the world. Sort of the typical type of valedictory speech, just a lot of optimism and sort of encouragement to make the world a better place. That sort of idealistic stuff.
When do you decide on science and medicine?
Yeah, a couple of different things influenced me. When I was much younger, I think it was age 9, if I remember right, I had an issue where I had really bad stomach pains, and my mother took me, my parents took me to the hospital. It's a hospital in Boston that's since gone bankrupt and is no longer existent. It was, I think, the Kennedy Children's Hospital. But at any rate, named after JFK. But the intern who was there just thought I was complaining, and it was just probably a gastroenteritis, and she discharged me. Now, this was in the days where the attending physician was nowhere in sight. I mean, he was there on the premises, yes. But it was just the intern that saw me, and she said to my mother, "Oh, it's nothing. He's just a kid. He's complaining." But my mother, who had a scientific background, and is in particular in the life sciences, and a lot of common sense, said, he's not a complainer. I'm really worried at something. But the doctor said go home, so she took me home. But it turned out it was appendicitis. Appendix ruptured, and actually got septic, really high temperature, 106, 107, actually documented 108 temperature, if you can believe that.
Oh my goodness.
But at any rate, it looked pretty bad. There was a blizzard going on at the time. But then the surgeon drove in through the blizzard and actually saved my life. He did an emergency appendectomy, and I was in the hospital for a long time, but obviously survived that, but could have been dead.
So roughly what years are this sort of?
I forget exactly when that was. I think I was about 9 years old at the time, so it was sometime in the 70s.
So healthcare has, surgical healthcare was pretty good in the 70s. So what was your reaction as a patient? 9-year-old patient in a surgical ward.
So first of all, my parents weren't at all litigious. If they were, that was going to be a slam dunk there for a number of reasons. But they were just thankful to the doctors and the nurses and the God that I was alive. So they weren't even. They were just full of gratitude, not blaming anyone. Myself, it was kind of weird. Some people have those negative experiences and they really grow to hate I love the hospital. I was like, wow, this is really neat. I really like the doctors and nurses here. They're really friendly. They're really nice to me. They're doing good stuff with the other patients. There are a lot of other sick kids there too. So that was one experience. So that didn't necessarily crystallize things. When I was done with high school, I really liked science, but I liked other things. I liked, writing. There were many things that I enjoyed. But then, I had to decide on colleges. Didn't really want to go too far from home. Was accepted in deciding between Harvard and MIT. MIT gave me a better financial aid package, so I went to MIT.
So science to MIT, I see that as a more technical school. But so tell me how you sort of, besides the financial package, there must have been something else.
I actually thought, I really liked science. I really liked engineering. And I thought it was just going to be a terrific place to go and, would be a great platform to do other things. So that was that. And, I had an advisor there that actually had, I think, a lot of effect on me. Dr. Weinberg actually discovered the first oncogene, really brilliant sort of individual. And, we were talking, I was getting advice from him and so forth. I was thinking of being a cancer researcher because I thought, hey, why not cure cancer? That's a nice, lofty goal for a young person, a bit naive, not fully understanding how complex cancer was at the time. But, it was interesting in that conversation. I still remember it vividly, when I was asking what motivated him to go into science and so forth. And he said it was just the love of science. He just loved the beauty of science and its elegance. And he said, if what I'm doing never translated into anything, he wouldn't have been personally disappointed. Now, that's easy to say after you've discovered the first oncogene, because obviously he's made a huge contribution. But he was sincere in saying that wasn't necessarily, a motivation to do something that would be, immediately clinically applicable. And when I thought about it, I thought, oh, but wait a second, I want to go into this to cure cancer. If I just spend a career in the lab and maybe I'm publishing in science and doing really neat stuff that my peers think is great, but if it doesn't actually end up helping patients in my lifetime, I would feel really disappointed. I wouldn't feel fulfilled. So that sort of caused me to change trajectory a little bit away from being a basic science researcher. And I did a fair amount of basic research at MIT, including some pretty high-powered labs, folks working with folks like Dave Hausman and Richard Mulligan. But ultimately then went on to do medicine for that reason.
Your sister, did she go into science too? Or
no, her love and talent really had to do more with languages. She actually ended up in the insurance industry, ironically.
You now have to decide on medical school. Where are you wanting to go?
I really love being in Boston, but just had this view in my mind that New York was the epicenter of the world, and I really want to live in New York. So I applied to all the New York City medical schools and got into all of them, ended up going to Cornell. They also gave me a really generous financial aid package, I should say. Thank you, Cornell. And had a great time there and got to do some clinical research as well, work with Dick Devereaux and the hypertension group there doing research on hypertension.
Who by the way, at the time was the leading group in that field.
Yeah, Dr. Pickering as well, doing great work in hypertension and its effects on left ventricular remodeling. So really developed a love of hypertension research, but more broadly clinical research and cardiology research. So did that there, then ended up, doing the usual interview circuit for internal medicine. Really loved Penn. I think in part.
So you went to Penn after that?
Yeah, and in part because of the program director, late Dr. Martin. But when I met him, he was just this spectacular, warm, fuzzy, caring guy. And I just said, okay, why wouldn't I want a program director like that? So I ended up having a great time there.
So where along the way did you meet your wife?
We met in New York, actually. So that's where we met.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Got married, still married. We've got 4 kids at this stage.
Oh, great.
You've heard this story because you also have a number of children. And a lot of times people think I have a second marriage because I've got 2 older kids. The oldest is 26, and then there's a 21-year-old. But then I've got 2 younger kids, a 10 and a 12-year-old. But we just had a big pause.
Your father may not relate to that, but at least you need a little hiatus.
Yeah. Well, he ended up being the oldest. He did have an older sister. She died, but then he was the oldest. And that actually encumbered him with a lot of responsibility, financial and otherwise, because he had to basically make sure that all... And his father actually died at a relatively young age. And in his mid-50s of insulin-requiring diabetes.
So you're at Penn now, doing an internship?
All right, the internship.
Working 24/7?
Well, yeah.
The training programs at the time?
Right, exactly. I mean, I literally, as would my colleagues, house officers, just be up all night. There was no basically you're admitting patients through the night. There's no going home early the next day. You just got to take your lumps and be happy about it. But it was great. It was great camaraderie. I mean, I've never been in the military, but it was probably like being in the Marines. It's tough. Hours are grueling, physically challenging as well as mentally challenging, but you really develop great bonds
gel
with
together.
people.
So did you know already out of Cornell that you were going to do cardiology, or was that something that sort of materialized a little bit at Penn?
Well,
at the time, Penn had a very strong cardiology program.
You're absolutely right. Well, at Cornell, I got a sense of it. I mean, I was actually in my 4th year there, the Papanicolaou anatomy scholar, and doing that, I was doing anatomy of the thorax and teaching it, and I really liked the heart. And as part of that, we got a cardiology fellow who came down and showed us cath films. That's when intervention was just starting to take off, and that really had a huge impact on me. And it's a great message. Sometimes residents, fellows don't realize what a huge impact they have as teachers and mentors. Yes. And it's, I've never even told this, and it was that I really had such a transformative day when he came down and showed those films.
Who was this fellow that, can you remember his name?
I don't even remember his name now, so it's just, it was just somebody that came down. He was just sort of, I guess he volunteered to do it, and he did it.
So now you're at Penn finishing medicine. So picking cardiology fellowship.
Yeah, and I did the usual circuit there. Wasn't particularly geographically constrained at that point. And there was a lot of exciting stuff going on at Cleveland Clinic at the time in terms of devices, in terms of drugs, a few other places that were doing both. Of course, Duke was doing both. Ended up going to Cleveland Clinic and just having a great time there, as you know, doing a number of fellowships there in general and interventional cardiology, peripheral cerebrovascular intervention, then staying on as faculty.
How did you know you were going to do interventional cardiology?
I really loved being in the lab the minute I entered there. And, it's a historic place, the Soanes Cardiac Lab. And that history really carried through. I mean, when I started there as a fellow, a lot of the nurses and techs had worked with Dr. Soanes, and of course, a lot of the attendings. So that legacy was still there. And it was just a great group to learn from. The attendings, the nurses, the techs, I mean, they were really, really talented people with a lot of experience. And, being Cleveland, maybe less so than a place like Boston, a lot of the people that were there had been there for a long, long time. That's why there was that connection still with people that had worked and trained with Soanes and other of his peers. So it was a great experience.
Your research career has been phenomenal. I mean, so which were the mentors that really started you on this? I mean, you published, I don't know how many papers, 700, 800, maybe more.
It's over 1,000, but
who's counting? But the point is, who was helping you start that process the most?
Sure. Well, I mean, I was lucky there. I had a lot of, great mentors. Eric really was very generous, giving me an early start and having leadership roles in trials. So that was really great. There were a lot of folks there. Steve Nissen really played a key role in a lot of mentorship. Mike Linkoff, another person, Dave Moliterno, Jim Young, really a lot of people that gave me a lot of opportunities with trials, with writing. Sometimes fellows, it seems like, don't necessarily view those as opportunities when someone says, here's a book chapter, write it. But I always view those, I was like, wow, that's so nice that they think enough of me that, that they're going to ask. Maybe they couldn't find anyone else to do it, but I didn't know that.
And you were lucky to work with one of the most prolific book writers in our cardiovascular history, Eric Topol. He's written more cardiovascular books than I can think of anybody else. So you were in the right place for that. And so
now, in fairness, I had a lot of mentors even outside of Cleveland Clinic. I mean, I think, Rob indirectly, I've got to give him credit too, working collaboratively, a lot of things. You gave me a lot of opportunities early on with Crusade, that registry that maybe people listening don't know the full history of, but that has morphed into the ACC's ACS registry. So, giving me an opportunity early on when I was a junior faculty, really thank you for that.
Well, you're welcome. So how many years are you in Cleveland before you decide to jump the ship back to your hometown, Boston?
Yeah. Well, the Midwest is always, like I said, it's sort of been home too, because I spent a lot of time in different places in the Midwest, including Ohio. But yeah, I ended up spending, I think, 14 years at the clinic. And now I've been in Boston about 11 years, I believe. So
half and half almost.
Yeah. Yes. And initially I came to Boston or back to Boston to be chief of cardiology at the VA, which was a Brigham appointment. Historically, that chief of cardiology has always been a Brigham appointee. And, folks like Dr. Brownwald and Dr. Libby and Dr. Lascalzo came calling. And, I thought, okay, well, these seem like really good people and good mentors. And, you're not going to say no when Dr. Brownwald is asking you to take a position. So I made the move, and that was a great tenure. I loved being in the VA. I loved taking care of vets. Really dedicated colleagues there that loved clinical care and especially loved teaching. Got to work with house officers and medical students from throughout the city, even though my appointment was a Harvard appointment. We had
because they all rotate.
Yeah, we had BU medical students there, folks from Boston Medical Center, BU's primary teaching affiliate rotating through there, some of the other teaching hospitals as well, Beth Israel house officers coming through. So for me, it was great getting to interact, with all these different folks from different institutions.
So you've done something unusual in the sense that you're an interventional cardiologist, but you have published a large body of evidence around prevention.
Right.
So that's an unusual combination. So how did that sort of come about?
Yeah, I don't think it's actually so unusual. At least, interventionists who are thoughtful, I think, realize that prevention is part of that continuum. That is, you can just be a technician and, implant stents or TAVR valves and so forth. That's fun, helps patients. But I think it's better to be a bit more of a complete doctor and, understand some patients should get referred to surgery. Surgery is not an evil word. That medical therapy is appropriate for many patients, that these are often complementary approaches, and that, the best intervention is to prevent the need for intervention in the first place. So I think they're related. And, there are other folks that have done it too. Roger Blumenthal, for example, had been an interventionalist, now a prominent preventivist. So, I think it actually is pretty logical along a continuum. But I guess one thing I've done is sort of maintain my interests in both those areas.
Right. Maybe the oncogene had more of an impact on you than you thought.
Maybe it did.
So, your children, anyone in that sphere going into medicine?
So first of all, as parents, we're not pressuring our kids to do anything. Maybe my wife is a little bit, but I'm not pressuring the kids at all in any way, because I don't want them to turn around and blame me and say, well, you're the one that said do it. So I would never do that. The oldest was trying to figure out what he wanted to do, but might be heading towards medicine. I mean, he will finish in May a post-bac program at Northeastern. So maybe he's going to go into medicine. He wants to. The second one's a senior at Boston University, but is probably going to take a year off and likely going to apply to medicine.
And what's next for Deepak? What do you see in the future?
That's a good question. I mean, I think every human being, as they get older, needs to think about, what's next. Right now, I'm certainly enjoying what I'm doing. Things are going really well at Brigham and Women's and at Harvard. There's a lot of stuff that I'm involved with at the Brigham, including administratively. There's a lot of stuff I'm involved with in terms of research, obviously. Stuff I'm involved with Harvard Medical School. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Harvard Heart Letter, so that lets me interact with cardiovascular specialists at all the Harvard teaching hospitals. So there's a lot of stuff that I'm doing that I really enjoy. So
you have a big basket to pick from. Deepak, this has been terrific. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us. It's a fascinating story. So thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks for playing a big role in that story.
It's been a great partnership.